This panel dives deep into how cities, towns, and emerging sectors can transform into dynamic growth hubs, creating new opportunities and closing regional disparities. Over to you, Aditi. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and it's my pleasure to moderate this panel, which I think is one of the most consequential conversations we're going to have about India's future. How can we build a truly inclusive and innovation-driven economy by empowering our next growth hubs, the Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities? I'm fortunate to have an exceptional panel here, leaders who have each contributed in their own ways to India's growth story. We're going to use the next 44.37 minutes in three parts. First, to understand where the opportunities lie. The second bit is what are the barriers in creating access to this opportunity? And then from your experiences, what do you think could be possible solutions? So we'll dive right into the first part. And I'm going to start with you, Aarti ma'am. Um, you know, you've extensive experience in national and state level policy making. What economic momentum are you seeing, or are you expecting outside of our big metro cities? Are there policy signals or early success stories that you can share with us?
Thank you. So let me look at it two ways. First of all, look at the evidence. And I'm not going to quote the source, that can be done offline. The first is that job openings in tier 2 and 3 cities rose by almost 42% compared to 19% in tier 1 cities. That tells you something. Secondly, of the 1.2 lakh DPIT recognized startups, nearly 50% last year were in the tier 2 and 3 cities, up from 35% 2 years back. Thirdly, GCCs have grown by 15% in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So what does this tell you about the way the economy is growing and what's happening in these cities? So which brings me, initially you mentioned about Sarkar, Bazaar and Samaj. So let me take up Sarkar and Bazaar first. What's happening in these cities is that a huge amount of infrastructure and public goods is growing. There are growing amenities. There's definitely better AQI. There is good network. There is good colleges. There's good schools. That ecosystem has gotten created. Secondly, many state governments are now coming out with huge incentives for manufacturing and also for the services sector. There are clusters, there are hubs, there are industrial estates. That is attracting business there. The service sector, we find a lot of, for example, B&Bs, a lot of hotel industry coming up in these. So the jobs are growing and the industry is responding to that. The second thing is the cost of living is, of course, much lesser, and there are good connectivity. You have the whole Udan scheme, you have better railway network, better road network. All that is adding to the growth in the tier 2 and 3 cities. So I'll stop here, I think, not go further, but come to the other issues later on.
Thank you for setting the context. Kumaresh, turning over to you from a private sector perspective. It's pretty evident both from the government numbers as well as what we're seeing on our own LinkedIn platform and economic graph data that India's economic momentum is shifting to smaller cities as well. We've seen innovation hubs come up, we've seen some GCCs come up, and AI-driven skills and AI-driven economy is changing landscape of job and talent. So in this changing landscape, what do you think are the unique opportunities for Indian kids or Indian youth in tier 2 and tier 3 cities?
Yeah, thanks, Aditi. The next chapter of India's economic growth will definitely get written beyond the metros. It's obvious at this point. As Vikram would attest, the GCC growth has exceeded every expectation we've had. The 42% jobs growth being double of the growth we see in metros is phenomenal. The thing that I find fascinating is this growth is not just coming from the tech sector. When you look at for example, Gujarat as a state, 350,000 new hires in the last 12 months, of which only about 25% were in tech, software engineers. We saw financial professionals, we saw project managers, we saw many different professions grow. And Gujarat as a state is positioning itself as a strategic hub for digital and financial innovation. And when I see this and think about the opportunity that this presents for Indian youth, it almost reminds me of someone that is trying to navigate a very complex path. Say you have like Google Maps today, and you need to go from place A to place B, and place B doesn't change, every few months, right? It's fairly static. You have a map, you have a direction, you're able to go in that direction. The challenge right now is that the skills needed for these jobs are changing a lot faster. So there is no Google Map for like someone in a tier 2 city who doesn't know which skills do I pick up to be able to go to the destination that I'm looking for. And therein lies a huge opportunity for us to be able to always be able to shine a light on skills that are mostly in demand, but also educate youth on the fact that these skills are changing. They will change, right? Today, in tech, it's maybe Python and SQL, and in non-tech, it may be CRM and analytics and change management. But guess what? In 3 months from today, it's going to be different, and you will need a Google Maps for your career. And for that, we are really excited to be a platform that can hopefully give this youth direction.
Thanks. That's you raise an interesting point there. I think it's our own analysis, LinkedIn's analysis, that says that for doing the same job by 2030, the skills required will change by over 70%. And thank you for the maps analogy. And I'll come to you, Dr. Ravi. You wrote an interesting paper using daytime satellite imagery. You've highlighted that the least developed regions in India have been going faster since 2015. Given that, what do you see as the most promising opportunities from your perspective, from your vantage point, emerging in tier 2 and tier 3 cities?
We are urbanizing a lot faster than we can even imagine. India today is close to 70% urban. But the thinking, which unfortunately, we have a Gandhian thinking, India lives in the villages. So policy is almost entirely focused on rural population. Of course, rural isn't rural anymore. That was the reason why I did that satellite imagery data, because you have daytime. No one is looking at night lights data anymore. That is 10 years back. Because we have all moved to LED, right? And LED, the luminosity is not as much. So the night lights data is passé. You look at daytime satellite imagery 10 meter into 10 meter. So you're able to see kahan pe kitna growth, construction hua hai. In fact, you can look at energy efficiency of buildings. Those are the kind of absolutely funky things you can do, because from a policy perspective, it's very important. The fastest growth is in, of course, and this is expected, it's a base effect. Because we've had so little construction, etc., outside of these cities, that the concentration in terms of infrastructure from government has largely been in the smaller. But beyond government, you're also seeing that the smaller townships are expanding much faster. Now, the reason I gave you that analogy is because we need to now start making urbanization as the next big infra push. The intercity connectivity, whether it was Udan or railways and roads, etc., we've actually done a very decent job of it in the last 10 years. But the marginal gain out of additional roads and additional airports, etc., isn't as high as it is in cleaning up the cities. And by cleaning up, I mean just better infrastructure, right? So the productivity gain, the job gain, growth gain overall is very critical. Now, your real economy is racing ahead much faster than the administration. And I want to drive home this point by giving you the example of Gurgaon. Till the year 2008, and this is millennial city, all of you know about Gurgaon. Till year 2008, there was no urban local body, which means Gurgaon, our millennial city, was effectively being run by panchayats. Now imagine the dissonance between how rapidly the real economy on the ground is racing ahead. You're far more dynamic than you're actually being told or you realize. You're far more dynamic economically in terms of growth. There's far more stuff happening. The data and what we are picking up and the administration is at least 10 years behind.
I'll come to you, Akash, and connected to that is you're actually doing the work. You're actually doing the work in schools, in ITIs, youth programs in smaller towns. What are you observing as you work in tier 2 and tier 3 towns? How are youth engaging with opportunities, especially with, with technology and AI that can potentially make opportunities more accessible?
Yeah, I'll take a step back and also look at it from a, what are the signals from a youth perspective as well, and what are we seeing? So when, mobiles came and internet penetration increased, we used to talk about this ABCDE of mobile learning, which was astrology, Bollywood, cricket, devotional, and hopefully E would be the education, employment, entrepreneurship. But what we are seeing that E is actually emotional confidant, which is what we are seeing the pattern of AI being used as an emotional confidant, where people feel a lot more confident talking to AI to use that kind of language, reassuring language, which humans actually haven't been able to do at scale. So that just sort of told us what that big gap in a young person, that mental health challenge is real, and we really need to think about that. It's not just about the economic opportunity. It's also about the emotional and what is inside a young person and the issues that they are facing. So that was one thing that's coming up. I think the other is that young people are not necessarily taking one full-time job, but many small jobs or many different kinds of jobs. So while they're working in agriculture sector, they're also on gig platforms, they're also on multiple gig platforms, and they're making actually money through these different channels, which is not visible to us in a dashboard or in a database, but it's actually what people are actually, navigating the system through that. I think the third one was, and this is something that we've been talking about, sort of this mindset shift from job seeker to job creator, and how the social media channels are opening up opportunities to start small businesses. Even in ITIs, a lot of learners that we are seeing are going for starting small businesses. So there is some glimmer there that people's mindsets are shifting towards this new opportunity, but also, I think, just access to new information around, travel or other recreational sources are creating new ambitions as well, and the new aspirations that are getting created, which is also driving a certain kind of fantasy for the future. And those who, the kind of fantasy, those who control the fantasy, in a sense, control their future. So we need to look at how are these fantasies actually, pulling them for newer opportunities as well. So digital creator is a huge opportunity that young people are going after. We did a study on digital lives of young people where we were capturing stories and that was an underlying trend of how digital creation is the big piece that everyone's being drawn to.
Thanks, Akash. A, B, C, D, E, and then you said E emotions, E entrepreneurs, and the last one was entertainment, digital creation. The other more popular acronym, GCCs. Vikram, three of us are from Bangalore, and there's not one conversation that you can have where GCCs are not mentioned. I'd love to understand from you that, of course, Hyderabad, Gurgaon, Bangalore are often, what do you think of when you think of GCCs? What are you seeing in tier 2, tier 3 cities, Coimbatore, Indore, etc.? What's happening there?
Yeah, thanks, Aditi. So I just want to put the industry in context. Like you mentioned, GCCs as an abbreviation are everywhere, but this is an industry that's taking flight as we speak. More than 1,600 GCCs employ about 1.5 million professionals in this country. It's a 5x job multiplier, so you're looking at about 8 to 9 million people employed overall. And this just goes to show then that the impact that this industry can have in sort of bridging that gap between tier 1s, tier 2s, and beyond, right? So if you look at what's happening over the last couple of years, we're seeing about a 25 to 30% increase in demand outside of the core metros. The reality is our core cities are just saturated. There's just no space to grow. I mean, a bunch of us here are from Bangalore, and we can attest to the fact that it's a nightmare. So there is tremendous need and ask for what's beyond. And if you just look at what's happening over the last couple of years, a 25 to 30% demand into the tier 2s and tier 3s. And out of these, if you look at what's happening in cities like Ahmedabad with Gift City, Kochi with Infopark. There's similar sort of developments happening in Indore, in Jaipur, so on and so forth. So I think there's a tremendous potential that is now coming to the fore. And of course, given to the fact that you've got lower costs of operations, salaries are anywhere between 20 to 25% cheaper. You've got attrition numbers that are about 10 to 20% lower. You've got real estate costs that are anywhere between 30 to 40% lower. And all of this just means that there is the perfect storm brewing for us to really take advantage, of course. Now, there are challenges, and I know you're going to cover that in subsequent questions as well. But just in terms of what else is happening, I think governments have been quite proactive. So there's a lot of very interesting policy interventions that have come about that are incentivizing investments into tier 2s and tier 3s. And there is also a lot of returning back of professionals from tier 1s back to their hometowns, looking to sort of set up and almost give back by nurturing the local ecosystem. So in many ways, I think we're at that inflection point of where this industry could really define what bridging the gap could mean for us.
Thank you. We'll move to the second section now on what are potential challenges and barriers to inclusive growth in tier 2, tier 3 towns. Kubresh, I'll come to you. You alluded a little bit to it that that young people in tier 2, tier 3 towns sometimes they may not have the most effective Google Maps because point B is shifting. It's no longer static. Skills are fluctuating, what skills you need to have, people sometimes don't have that clarity, they don't have the right networks and mentors. But according to you, what do you think are the more critical challenges for when we start thinking of especially youth in tier 2, tier 3 towns?
Yeah, I think it's very clear at this point that the world of work is changing faster than we can keep pace with it. I think you alluded to this, 36% of skills needed for jobs have changed in just the last decade. And by 2030, in just 5 years from today, the skills needed would have changed by 70%. 50% of jobs that are India's jobs on the rise today didn't exist 20 years ago, right? So like if you were to go pursue a certain role, a certain job title, you wouldn't have a map to be able to get there because it didn't even exist, right? So for India's youth in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, the biggest challenges I see, they fall in two buckets. There's a skill gap and there's a network gap. The skill gap is where about 45% of India's youth is what industries today consider employable, and that number is even lower in tier 2, tier 3 cities. So how do you now create a map for these individuals? How do you help them pick up skills that are in demand today and stay on track with new skills that come in the next few years? And a big part of making the skill gap, of solving the skill gap is the network gap. 85% of professionals in the world, they rely on a human network, on relationships to be able to even navigate this world. Right? Like to find the right jobs, to get the right career advice. And this is especially concerning if you are in a tier 2, tier 3 city, especially if you're a woman or if you are just entering the workforce. It's, we know that women they're 14% less likely to have a strong professional network, right? Which means that their ability to get the sort of guidance that they need to enter this workforce is hard. Likewise, with someone that's a first generation learner or graduate, right? They don't have that roadmap for them ahead. So while all these challenges exist, I'm also seeing stories. One of the advantages of being part of LinkedIn is that you get access to members who are in need of this sort of guidance. And I'll share the story of a small town girl from Rajasthan. Her name is Meena Radhakishan. She grew up in a household that had a daily wage laborer and homemaker. And sure enough, works hard, is academically very committed, gets into an NIT, and at some point gets mentorship from the FFE program. And that's where she realizes that beyond college, there isn't an obvious roadmap that's been built for them, right? It's through conversations with mentors, through connecting with professionals on LinkedIn, through seeking the right sort of educational opportunities that were pointed to by people that she had mentorship conversations with. She was ultimately able to get a referral and land an interview with Microsoft. Now, that's sort of a story within a single generation. I've seen that happen over multiple generations, but that sort of social and economic mobility is something that it gives me sort of hope at a time when I also see a lot of challenges that India's youth faces in Tier 2, Tier 3 cities.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that wonderful anecdote. Dr. Ravi, you've mentioned that we speak a lot about India's demographic dividend, but the window is closing. And you've also spoken a lot about how, unlike a lot of other countries like, say, Vietnam, China, we don't have enough female labor force participation. From your perspective, from a policy perspective, what are the numbers telling us, and what's your perspective on adding more women to the workforce?
You see, overall, our labor force participation has been low, not just for women. Women are a large part of that low number. But, we have only in the last 10 years pushed it beyond 50. Now we are close to 60. Now think of it in comparison. China had 75% labor force participation for 40 years. Vietnam has had very similar numbers. Bangladesh also had much higher number. So again, but then when you talk of all India numbers, and it's quite meaningless, you really have to look state by state. Okay? There are some states where the labor force participation tends to be very low. Now coming to the women's side of the story, our women are getting more educated than ever. They're acquiring all these wonderful skills. They're putting in a lot of energy, a lot of hard work. But the labor market situation is actually orthogonal, or it's coming in conflict with the societal roles, particularly motherhood. And this is why now we are making care economy. By the way, it's not enough to just say, let's build care economy. We have to put many nuts and bolts, many pieces of this, because it has not been done in the past. You see, if we just ape the G7 or the OECD countries, then we should really be just following what these multinationals and the multilaterals come and tell us, raise your female labor force participation. And I often tell them, well, show me the switch. You see, low female labor force participation is an outcome of all this, the way the institutions are arranged. Ki bhai, aapne padhai kar li, but now you're expected to have a child and raise the child, while the family structure is clearly breaking down. You're urbanizing very fast, which means you're leaving behind all of this. It takes a village. No, there is no village, and there is no family. It's all the costs are now stocked on the backs of young women. And I'm only talking children, but remember 120 million people above the age of 60. So care and taking care of somebody in the family is taking up a lot of time, and that's what your time use survey is telling you. Women in the working age are spending 4 to 5 hours a day taking care of someone. Now, I can have a statistical fix to it. I say shadow price dal do. What is the wage that you would earn if you went out and worked? Well, it amounts to almost 17% of the GDP. That's the kind of value that is getting created, but it's inside the household. So it's like, I go to Alkaji's house and I take care of her family. She comes to my house and takes care of my family. My GDP will double, at least from the care. Because now there is a marketed transaction. But abhi I'm doing it in my house and there's no money transacted, so it is discounted. The problem is not that it is discounted statistically. Wo to I can fix. The problem is the society discounts it. So we only value women who go out and earn money, which is why India's fertility rate in urban areas have been under replacement. They've fallen below replacement 25 years back. You're only now beginning to read this in the media. But do you realize how the demographics have already shifted? The young women, it's too costly for them to have all these more and more kids, isn't it? You are below 2. Replacement se kam kya? It is below now 2 also. 2.1 is replacement. 1.9 overall. Urban area is falling much faster. So, how do you reduce the cost for these women? By truly becoming a liberal, meaning give them choice. Agar kaam karna hai, then please make it easy for them to leave the child behind. We need more daycare facility. We need more child care. We need more elderly care. We also need better taxation as a household, as a family. You file taxes jointly. So financial institutions will have to reinvent, we'll have to think of new instruments, and we are thinking of them. I don't want to give you a sense that ye sab abstract issues hai, no. Because we have learned that unlike the Japanese and the Chinese, in the Chinese case it was very coercive from the state, one child. But in the Japanese case it wasn't coercion by the state but by society. Because the women were told, okay, you still have to do all this household work even if you are, because the men weren't pitching in. Again, crashing fertility. Japan is going to be as large as it was 100 years back, which means it is actually, very readily shrinking very quickly. We have just come out of poverty. We need to grow for another 50 years. High income की तो हम बात भी नहीं कह रहे, हम तो विकसित भारत कह रहे हैं. Viksit Bharat means our HDI and all has to go. We have to become a middle income, like a high middle income. But what about an affluent nation? If we aspire for a G7 type, then you are plagued with the same problem the Chinese are today. They have grown old before they have become rich. So labor costs, the way they are rising, what are they going to do? Right? We have exactly the same problem. So when I say the window is shrinking, I'm thinking my working population is now going to shrink faster. My dependent population is going to continue to rise. What you have in the form of children, 20 saal baad it will be in the form of elders. But they are not working. Now we can tweak around a little bit like the Japanese and say, there is age, which is chronological age, that I'm 50 years old, but there is biological age, which is I'm as productive as a 30-year-old. So the Japanese are actually looking at new metrics of age and productivity. But we know that there are limits to this kind of innovation. Fundamentally, we will really have to change societal roles if you want women to work and have children. Men will have to pitch in. We will have to build care. And I want to leave you with one very dismal statistics, which finally motivated me to start thinking very seriously about care. During the pandemic, globally we saw one very disappointing data, that in the richest part of the world, historically, it has never happened that so many elderly people have died alone without a kin around. So there's no family member. These are old people dying alone. And that tells you, but that's not the kind of growth that we should really be aspiring. We do value family. We do value community. That must also help you understand why we are going up on cooperatives. Cooperatives and the Ministry of Cooperation is not just about cooperative society for credit. It's about building institutions and society and community. Because very quickly we have gone the Western way. वो थोड़ा सा pull back करना पड़ेगा. Otherwise we are on a precipice. Right? So think of labor market and role of women from a much larger institutional perspective. Do not think of it like a sterile, mechanical, वो labor force बढ़ा दो. नहीं होगा. It has never happened. Right? So I'm just introducing you to institutional economics to really appreciate that, in India we have many things going right, but when it comes to women, we still are a long way to go.
Thank you for that. Aarti ma'am, in the context of policy and program implementations, I think Dr. Ravi set the context for why we need these policies, but when it comes to implementations, at your role at Ministry of Labour and Employment, what did you think were the barriers that disproportionately affect, say, women or first-generation learners or youth from smaller towns?
I can't add anything to what Dr. Shamika Ravi said, but let me try. So I was talking of Sarkar and Bazaar. This is about Samaj, right? So how do elephants get tamed? As kids, they are chained. When they grow up, the chain is not there. It's there in their mind. And that's what happens. That's what happens to women. That's what happens to people with disabilities. That's what happens to youth in the tribal areas. They do not think they can do it. They don't think they can go to Microsoft. All of them don't think like that, right? So those barriers are there. But again, if we look economically, and we were talking growth in the earlier session, Claudia Gordon showed us that it is a U-shaped curve. As the economy grows, women's workforce participation will grow. Similarly, at the household level, when there's more education, there's more income, women's workforce participation goes up. It tells us that patriarchy gets trumped by economics. So the solution to that, which, we had this huge database of informal workers, the e-Shram database, nearly 30, lots of, maybe it's grown much bigger now. And you see, most of the women are in the informal sector. 50% were women in the informal sector. Most of them are migrating, not alone, but with their husbands. A vulnerable category, you talked of care, for example, their own care work, but we also have women who go out for paid care work through organizations, through agencies, through networks. That is a totally untapped area. So there are a lot of vulnerabilities that somebody who's broken those mental barriers and goes out, that person faces. Many of those sectors, many of those places are totally beyond the pale of anybody's idea or anybody's thought. Industrial estates, yes. GCCs, yes, they are out there. But it's not, there are a lot of things that we are not paying attention to. In fact, we were talking of retention, for example. Retention is much better when there are gender-friendly workplaces, even something like a toilet. Many of the platforms, for example, delivery platforms, in their logistics, they don't have toilets for women. You don't see women drivers that much in, I don't want to take names, but in the delivery ecosystem, right? So gender-friendly workplaces, providing, as Dr. Ravi mentioned, better childcare, better living conditions, etc. I think that's all that is needed. Just those enabling factors. And one thing, a very interesting thing that was done recently in Rajasthan, again, is that in 5 districts, they did the aspiration mapping for young girls. What is it that you want to become and what is realistically available? Right? And they found that many of them didn't really want outlandish stuff to happen in their lives. They wanted regular things. And once that kind of an aspiration mapping was done, it was found that they were more willing to go, the parents were more willing to let them go. They became role models eventually for the community, for their families. So a kind of a structured way of looking at it, creating enablers. In the end, it's all about this. You talked of content creators, for example. Nobody did a skilling course in content creation and became that. Nobody was taught how to use WhatsApp or Instagram. They did it. They have that capability. If we just do that kind of a systemic approach in a decentralized manner, the Samaj will come around. The bazaar is there, the Sarkar is there. They need to come together.
That's very powerful. Akash, from your work at at secondary schools and ITIs, what do you think there are models that should be scaled or could be scaled nationally, models that work? And everyone's spoken a little bit about retention. Tell us a little bit more about where leakages happen, where do people drop off in tier 2, tier 3 towns, and what could be the reasons for those?
So I think the latter one first, just to share a few learnings. One is, especially when boys want to migrate from, tier 2, 3 towns to cities for jobs, their retention is low because they don't want to do the hard work of, washing clothes and making food and the basics that otherwise they are taken care of, so at home. So that's one thing we are seeing as a drop-off point where people actually, and girls actually stay longer in jobs when they actually get out of their homes, and because there's also a struggle, there is a fight that they have to fight, but also that they can much better take care of themselves and manage themselves better. So that's been one interesting learning for us when we are seeing the migration from tier 2, 3 to where the opportunities actually are. I think the other drop-off point is just the stigma of their own institutions. They feel like, say, an ITI is a C, D grade institute. It does not give them the confidence that they are actually going to get the jobs of the future. And they feel demotivated by the kind of educational institutions and the prestige attached to that. So online spaces are spaces for them to learn and grow, but the drop-off point is just the lack of esteem and prestige in the institutions sometimes that they go to, what society values as well. So that's been another drop-off point. I think the dangers of misinformation. A lot of people are seeing viral stories and a lot of aspirations of, crypto and other, financial investments. They feel like they have to get on to that bandwagon really soon. They feel a little intimidated by what all is going on and don't feel confident that they'll be able to reach that stage where they can actually make money by making investments, even if it is small investments. That fear of whether I'll get there or not is definitely something that's constantly playing on young people's mind. I think the fear of community judgment, and especially girls constantly being policed on what are they watching, who are they connecting with, what are the networks they are unlocking. There's a certain taboo around women accessing digital tools to access new opportunities. And that is really something that then also sometimes make them believe that they are not good enough to actually make it on the digital platforms, or that the environment around me will stop me from actually accessing the opportunity as well. So I think those are a few drop-off points that we are seeing as we are speaking to young people about where they are. I think the good practices, or a couple of models that I can share. One, I think, is this whole idea of how do young people actually, when we talk about, jobs, AI jobs, it's typically low scale, say, data labeling jobs, right? And not necessarily problem solving for communities using AI, where you're able to think through solutions that are that matter in communities, and to be able to use AI for creativity and problem solving. We just teach it from a productivity tool usage, that this is how you do data labeling. So really what young people are concerned about is the dignity of some of these jobs. That will I be a data labeler all my life? And will I have the opportunity to grow in that industry? And they don't get that confidence right now, that they are looked at as people who can actually grow. And all the better jobs are so-called in other countries, whereas the low-scale AI jobs are in India. And they want to, dialogue with companies to say, we want, better quality jobs, or we want to see a growth in the growth path in the jobs that where we are starting, and how do we grow in that. I think, therefore, how do I become also beyond a consumer of AI, to also have a say and a creator of AI, a creator of solutions with AI? That's the shift they are also seeking, and that's some of the work that we are also doing in schools, where young people are imagining solutions, they are implementing it with technology, they are seeing the community impact of some of those solutions in the communities. So I think that's one shift. And just the last piece in terms of, you spoke about the Google Maps for, jobs and skills, and that's actually one of the products we've been working on over the last 5 years, is actually funded by Google, to create a Google Maps for young people's aspirations. If they can put a destination, they get the kind of skills, the internships, the scholarship, the mentorship that they are seeking to reach that destination. So it's not just a skills indicator, but other support services that young people need to transition safely into the world of work. That's something that we've been developing. We have about 150,000 users a year, who about 40% productively engaged after using the platform. Not, early stages, but still thought I'll share that.
That's a fantastic use case. Vikram, coming to you, from a firm level perspective, from GCCs or from companies who are trying to set up shop in India, what are they seeing as constraints in, say, in hiring, retention, upskilling in tier 2 and tier 3 towns?
Yeah, so we're talking about convincing some of the world's largest companies to invest millions and in some case billions into their future in India. And therefore, I think there's a bunch of things that we need to get right. Just infrastructure, both digital and physical. There's a great case of an employee, one of our customers' companies, who would never come on video. And the customer would keep saying, we need your video. He would always deny. And one day they forced him to put his video on. And when he did, he had 20 people behind him. There was a grandmother watching TV. There was someone cooking. And it just goes to show the fact that there is an audience that wants to contribute, but in some ways feels embarrassed by the fact that they don't have the right setting to be part of that system. So from a physical infrastructure standpoint, actually having more co-working, grade A workspaces where you can actually create these ecosystems for people to feel productive and thrive. From a obviously regulatory perspective, there's a lot being done, but just simplifying ease of doing business in some of these cities. It takes sometimes forever to get permits and clearances and so on, and I think that does come in the way of actually people choosing this. There's also a lot of work to be done in terms of really upskilling our talent. We have a very typical depth versus density challenge, right? So there's a lot of density of talent, but the depth is missing. So how do we actually get more experienced expertise in market? Could be through mentorships or bringing people back, et cetera, or skilling programs. I think all of those things will count, right? So as it's again a combination of a bunch of things that really come together to make something investment worthy for us to get there.
Got it. We have 5 minutes more. Last question. I'll stay with you, Vikram. In 1 minute and less, or maybe preferably in 30 seconds, what can GCCs, local governments, what can they do to come together as an ecosystem to enable growth and sustainable growth? And as Akash was mentioning, that we don't want to just see small cities as a cost out opportunity, but also as an innovation out opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think, look, AI, I mean, it's come up a few times on the panel. I think AI can be a tool that massively divides us as a country or brings us together and bridges that gap. And, I tend to favor the latter. And as an industry, I think the opportunity that we have is to participate with all of the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. If it's with government doing more public-private partnerships around infrastructure, investments, as well as skilling, but also in terms of ensuring that there's a constant bridge between the more established cities and tier 2. So we talk about a +1 strategy where you can set up tier 2 city GCCs in conjunction with a tier 1 GCC that already exists. And that gives you a bridge towards building an ecosystem without actually putting that entire burden of readiness on day one. That's something that we're seeing work really well. And quite honestly, I think it comes back to all of us as flag bearers of this industry to sort of show the confidence out to the world as well, which I think, again means that we need to be out in global forums talking about what we can do as a country. And we're on the way there, so I'm quite optimistic.
Thank you.
I met your 1 minute mark.
Absolutely, 10 on 10. Akash, from your perspective, investments, design principles, how do we ensure that, that good value AI work and not just the ones that don't have any growth path? How do we ensure that those are also going to our small cities?
I think one is invest in safe digital spaces where young people can explore their interests and passions as well, and not just look at it only from a jobs perspective, because that's where we feel a lot of stickiness comes from. I think the other one is co-creating solutions with them. So we've sort of got young people to develop an youth AI charter where we can take that and dialogue with various industry leaders and help young people express the ideas that they have from AI and their growth with industries that are creating that. I think the other one is really design for serendipity. So oftentimes we feel like everything has to be very planned, but we realize that young people stumble upon a lot of interesting things, and that's how they learn and get stuck on to things. So can we design more intentionally for that serendipity to happen, and design for agency, where they are not creators, consumers, but creators, and they are more in control of what we are designing for.
Thank you. Dr. Ravi, in 2018, you wrote one of the first papers that assesses AI's impact on the economy and highlighted that we'll have to do more to upskill India's large number of STEM graduates. So from a policy perspective, what do you think we should be doing to ensure that tier 2, tier 3 marginalized women, they're ready to take advantage of what's coming next?
Well, one is, of course, preparing the human resource, in terms of, and we go back to even fundamental things like basic labor productivity, health, education, taking time off and all of that because you're unwell or, so there is everything really that holds for core economic growth also holds for AI. So let's first understand that there is that similarity, right? So the more we invest in basic health, education, etc., it has an impact on AI and the possibility. But from a supply side, when we think of policies required, you see AI and AI applications where you really require the core fuel of data, right? And the core fuel of data, and this is what we are seeing some of the largest economies today jostle. And we need to now start also thinking we have the largest data ecosystem in the world, right? Which means that making data available itself is a huge social good. It's going to lead to all kinds of things. Now, regulatory oversight is important to prevent, many kinds of problems. But that's like putting the cart before the horse. We must prevent against those things. But imagine a Parchun shop, the kind of things he sells and the timing of the sale, even that kind of simple data, a big FMCG would kill for that kind of data from small Parchun shops. What I'm trying to tell you is, just like in your annual report you put, this is the amount of human resource, this is the amount of plant and machinery, we have to now start thinking of what is the value of the data that an enterprise owns. Because the value creation out of that will come from exactly that. So imagine, what companies would pay for, let's say, data from AIMS, the kind of ailments, what kind of devices can be then introduced, what kind of morbidities and comorbidities. These are very rich data sources that are getting generated because India is digitized very rapidly. But the commoditization of data, which is going to fuel this beautiful AI possibility, that is still at a very nascent stage. So we need to do that urgently.
Thank you. I'll take 2 more minutes. In a minute, Kumaresh, how can companies like LinkedIn, large platforms of professionals and our partners, what role do you think we should be playing in bridging this gap?
Yeah, I've always thought of technology as this platform that will democratize access to opportunities. There is the search box, and no matter who is typing into this box, it gives you somewhat equitable access to jobs and people. And then it took me a couple of decades of working on products like LinkedIn to realize that it's not really equitable access if you don't know what to type into that box. Right? And that's where, with AI, I feel like we now have a real shot at making it equitable. The other day, I saw a student just type in, hey, I'm interested in music, and I want to do something related to AI. And it goes, boom, first result, audio engineer at Dolby Research, right? And sure enough, you don't know the job title audio engineer. You don't know that Dolby Research is hiring, but it now gives you equitable access in a way to someone else who may have known that thanks to a mentor.
Thank you, that's fantastic. Last word, Aarti ma'am. What do you think from a policy perspective and implementation?
2 quick points. The first is we've been talking of data and AI. We have look at this person we were talking about who's marginalized. How do they look for jobs? Do they register separately on LinkedIn, on Quest, on a National Career Services portal, on MSD's portal, on eMigrate, on the state government's portal? Why is there no single window where a person goes and all these platforms become accessible? So that is my first suggestion. That is something we need to do, and it can be done tomorrow. It is so doable, and that will really facilitate what we've been talking about, the demand-supply mismatch. That is, to my mind, that will bring about agility in our system. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was about the tier 2 cities. Where, I've been interacting with an organization called Cure Bay in primary health care. They've had a lot of jobs and using AI. But I find that there are so many compliances. I think all of you would have read when a tea stall owner opened a small dhaba, he had to get 16 certificates. Where are we looking at ease of doing business for somebody who wants to set up a small enterprise? I think it's about time we also started looking at that, because that is also where jobs are getting created. These were the 2 points I wanted to make.